Patient stops responding to stimuli. Patient begins shaking violently, vomiting, and grunting. Patient muscles clench for great lengths of time and then relax. You suspect the following is happening to your patient. So it's a physical description of a seizure. So then you think, okay, well, probably while you're reading it, you think, okay, well, that's easy. It's a seizure. But then the question is actually not as simple as that. That would be sweet, but it's not that simple. So A, patient is having a tonic-clonic seizure. Well, I think he is. Patient likely has a cerebral bleed. Well, that's always worth entertaining with anybody having a seizure, but this guy had a seizure, came out of it, and now he's having a seizure again. If you have a cerebral bleed as the cause, again, that bleed will just get worse and worse. Your ICP will increase and increase, and you really should just seize until it's dealt with, or you die. Patient is having a Jacksonian seizure and likely has a cerebral bleed. Well, that also might kind of trick you into thinking, oh, well, he mentioned cerebral bleed twice, so it probably is that, and the trick here is to not pick Jacksonian. Well, no, don't let those kind of things get into your head. There's no rhyme or reason to anything. There's only the correct answer. Patient is having a tonic-clonic seizure. Patient is likely hypoglycemic. Well, that would definitely be a reason to have a seizure. But again, this guy's GCS was 15, then dropped again. Doesn't make sense you wouldn't have a spontaneous hypoglycemia, then back to normal, then spontaneous hypoglycemia again with zero external stimuli. That makes no sense. Patient is having a tonic-clonic seizure. There is no knowledge you have acquired that would help you determine the exact cause. That's the actual answer. We have no idea why he's having a seizure so far, but we've eliminated things that it could have been, and as you'll learn being a paramedic and in the medical field in general, you're never being like Dr. House, just feeling it's that. You're actually just going, oh, well, it's not these things, and that only leaves 3 things. So I think it's one of these 3 things. Just eliminating possibilities. You're always eliminating possibilities, and then what's left is likely the answer. Patient stays in this state until arrival to the hospital. So the state described in the previous answer is what he's like all the way to the hospital. And we've determined that that's a tonic-clonic seizure. It is very difficult to manage the patient's airway. That's going to matter for the next question. You suspect the patient has aspirated a large amount of vomit. That's also going to matter for the next question, right? His airway is shot. First of all, even if his airway was somewhat maintained and he was in a tonic-clonic seizure, it's really difficult to keep his oxygen up. It's really difficult to bag him. But not only that, I'm telling you, you can't manage his airway and he vomited and aspirated. You can't get a no-2 sat because he's seizing, but you do see his face has turned blue. Well, that's never a good color to see on a human being, no matter what the circumstances are. Hypoxia. Patient occasionally stops shaking and remains unconscious, GCS 3. So sometimes he stops, but he doesn't wake up. Then he restarts again. The following most accurately describes the patient's state. Hypovolemic shock? No. Status asthmaticus? No. Patient is in mechanical shock? No. There are reasons as to why these are no, but I think they're fairly obvious. The answer is status epilepticus, right? So seizures with no clear, non-stop seizures with no clear return to a normal level of consciousness is status epilepticus. And then the patient becomes VSA. Okay, to be expected, I guess, at this point. The monitor states no shock advised. Okay, you suspect that this is for the following reason. At a glance, you might think, how could you possibly answer this? But you can answer this because you followed the whole scenario and you know the guy's, you know his differential diagnosis, and based on the last question, you know exactly what's killing him, which is a mismanaged airway, vomit in the lungs, which ultimately means hypoxia. So what happens when you die from hypoxia? Generally speaking, hypoxia H is one of the H's and T's that lead to PEA. And therefore, coupled with the fact that the monitor states to not shock this patient, which immediately gets rid of VFib or VTAC anyway, the answer is C. That's the most likely outcome to hypoxia. Doesn't have to be that, but it's the most likely outcome.